When you live in rural Kansas, there's never really much to do that doesn't involve tractors, picket fences, and a whole lot of wide open spaces. There are no malls nearby, and the closest movie theater is 40 miles away. So it's no surprise that kids start drinking as early as grade 6 and partake in explicit adult activities just to kill time. That was never really my style though. I figured out another way to kill time. About a half hour from my town is a hidden cemetery at the end of a long winding gravel road. And the majority of the people buried there are children under the age of 10, mostly from the 1800s. Some of the stones are nothing more than crumble and ruins, and even some of the newer ones are weather-stained and mossy. During the day, it's pretty peaceful, even beautiful, but at night, it's a playground for the children that reside beneath it. I know this firsthand. Last summer, my friends and I decided to head out to the cemetery in the middle of the night. I had been there plenty of times during the day, but I've never been there after sunset, and we figured it would be a creepy experience to wander through the maze of headstones with flashlights and see who would make it back to the car first. When we reached the rusty gates, after carefully navigating the winding dirt road, I parked the car and we all climbed out. The first thing I noticed was how alarmingly quiet it was. During the day, there had always been a pleasant melody of birds chirping, insect noises, and the rustling of the wind through the overhead leaves. Standing in the pitch darkness, it almost felt like we were in the vacuum of space, or deep beneath the earth. I felt completely isolated and alone. I kept glancing up at the night sky, desperate to find at the very least a single star. I kept the car running and the headlights on, and we wandered across the cemetery aimlessly, not looking for anything in particular, just reading the headstones and trying to enjoy the thrill of the experience of being there so late at night. None of us were drunk or inhibited in any way, unless you count how wired we were from all the Monster energy drinks. I was off in the far corner of the graveyard by myself trying to find the earliest date inscribed on one of the headstones when my friend Nick called over, asking who was already back at the car. I turned around and looked back at the idling car, but I didn't see anyone standing by it. We did a head count, and none of us were near the car. Nick swore that he'd seen a shadow by the passenger's seat, but when no one owned up, we all chalked it up to nothing and continued exploring the maze of headstones. I was compelled to clear the space around some of the headstones, immersed between twigs and fallen branches. But as I was moving the debris, that's when I heard a child's faint laughter beyond the fence out in the woods. I pointed my flashlight in the direction I heard it, and I saw nothing. There was no mistaking the sound of laughter because the forest was dead silent and everybody else was behind me in the other direction, so it couldn't have been any of my friends. The thought that someone was out there in the dark, child or not, did not sit well with me, so I slowly began moving my way back to the car, with my eyes still fixed in the black abyss. Nick was still exploring the stones, and Louis was sitting by the fence, facing out into the woods, and my friend Joel was already back at the car, sitting in the passenger seat. I was about to make my way towards Nick when we all heard a jingle of music. Our flashlights all aimed in the spot where the music was coming from, illuminating a gravestone we all had overlooked. There on the ground in front of it was a small red box with a spinning handle on the side, slowly turning on its own. "It's a jack-in-the-box," I said out loud. Nick questioned, "Why would someone leave a toy on a grave for a kid that died in 1904? I was about to say something when the handle started spinning insanely fast, and the music blurred, and then followed the jack spontaneously popping out from the box. There was dead silence as we all looked on in shock and apprehension. The crank had gone from barely moving to suddenly spinning like a helicopter propeller. We just gave each other sideways looks and began heading back to the car. We all piled in, and I looked over at Joel, who had a look of unease, like he wanted to get the hell out of there, and fast. I asked what was wrong, and he responded with, "Was one of you hitting the outside of the car just now?" We all shook our heads no. Joel said that when he returned to the car and shut the door, he heard the soft tapping of hands on the exterior of the car, starting at the trunk and slowly making their way forward towards the passenger seat. We all just thought he was being paranoid. About a half hour later, we made it back to my house and parked in the garage. As we were piling out of the car, I froze. I noticed with certain clarity dozens of child-sized handprints all along the passenger side of the car. Nick and everyone else had seen them too, but we rarely ever speak about it. I've since been back to that cemetery in daylight, but I haven't seen that Jack-in-the-Box again. Several months ago, the girl I was seeing suggested that for our third date, we take a bottle of wine, a laptop, and a scary movie to the most remote graveyard we could possibly find. We were both hardcore horror fans and thought that we were jaded and immune to fear, so throwing ourselves into the ideal environment for terror seemed like a thrilling experience to savor. We chose a graveyard from public record that neither of us ever went to, and then late at night, we drove for a good hour out into the deep back country. When we finally came upon its location, we needed to park about 3 miles away behind some large undergrowth because there was no other place to turn off along the forested country road. With our flashlights guiding us, we walked along the winding dirt path leading towards the unmarked graveyard, trying not to tread into the undergrowth on either side. We eventually came to a wide shadowy clearing in the trees, and there the century-old gravestones came into view, laying randomly in no discernible order. We set up our laptop onto our blanket, opened the wine bottle, turned off our flashlights, and started the movie. The vibe around us was very palpable and eerie, which only added to the excitement until the unexpected happened. Not 10 minutes into the movie, out through the trees, we saw the headlights of a pickup truck moving along the country road in the distance. It was the only vehicle we'd seen out here, deep in the country. At first we thought nothing of it, until it came back the other way. Its headlights were distinct, so it was clearly the same truck. The truck slowly rolled through the gated entrance to the cemetery, and I immediately shut the laptop just as the headlights beamed in our direction. My girlfriend and I got down low, shielded by the tall grasses as we saw the truck slowly shift into reverse as if it was turning around. But then it parked just outside the gated entrance. I was uncertain whether or not the driver had seen us, nor did I know their intentions. I suggested we leave immediately, and she agreed. Slowly we started packing everything away, trying to stay as quiet as possible, when the truck suddenly went dark. We froze, crouched down, being as still as possible, trying to anticipate the driver's next move, or at least what he was doing for so long. Minute after minute, we sat still like that, and nothing. The path we came here from was too daringly close to that truck to risk that move, and we didn't want to go through the trees, potentially making noise and getting lost. After so long, I was beginning to suspect that the driver had fallen asleep and would be oblivious to us making our way past. I grabbed my girlfriend's hand, and without saying a word, motioned for us to move slowly towards the path. We eventually made our way to it, and as soon as I was sure we had made it, well beyond the truck's line of sight, we finally arose to our feet and picked up our pace. As we were moving, I continued listening for any distinct sounds from the truck, but the uneventfulness of the moment just added to my paranoia. I tried to rationalize to myself that we were finally in the clear, and that these shady, unsettling occurrences were simply a coincidence, though I found it difficult to not think about the worst possible situation while hustling through a grim dirt path with my girlfriend in pitch darkness. Then, all of a sudden, we heard a terrified high-pitched scream of a woman, followed by a gunshot. I swore my soul left my body for a brief moment. We froze in shock and terror until the echo of the gunshot faded. Then we booked it to the car as fast as we could. After running for a while, I brought my girlfriend and myself to a halt, as it dawned on me that we likely had at least a good mile and a half to cover before we would reach the car, and that truck could catch up to us before we would make it. Then we would be in serious trouble. Even if we somehow made it to the car in time, the truck could catch us parked or pulling out from our spot. I urged my girlfriend that we needed to hide fast. I had to explain myself to her twice in my panicked state before she understood, and we dove into the undergrowth at the side of the path, laying under our blankets as flat on the ground as we could. My cheek was pressed into the cold, wet mud as I could hear my girlfriend trying to control her frantic breathing. I released her hand and started stroking her hair to try to calm her down. To my horror, my gut feeling came true. I heard the sound of the truck coming down the path as I began to see its headlights, which eventually passed where we were hiding. Then it stopped suddenly. I then heard it back up a little ways and stop. It just idled there for what seemed like 10 minutes, until I feared the worst. I realized the driver may have seen something I might have dropped somewhere on the path. The driver did not get out, and after what seemed like the longest moments of my life, the truck finally continued slowly down the path, fading around the distant bend, until we were in complete darkness. As soon as I was sure the truck was gone, I said to my girlfriend that we should lay low for a little while longer, as the driver could have spotted our car and was probably waiting for us to return. That man was likely armed, and we'd be completely defenseless should we come across him. We eventually got up and decided to move deeper into the woods to hide where there was drier ground. It was then that I realized that one of our flashlights was missing. I must have dropped it, and the truck's headlights spotted it on the path. We thought it best to hide out for a while under our earth-toned blanket, with dead leaves I'd thrown over it. We laid hidden there for about another hour when we heard the truck coming back up the dirt path. From the sound of the engine, we knew it was that same truck, except its headlights were off this time, and it was moving slowly at a crawl. This horrified me even further, only confirming that the driver was looking for us, and knowing he had a gun. We decided to stay hidden there until dawn, taking turns dozing off. By the time there was sunlight, we were both sweaty and sticky, eager to stretch and get our legs moving. Out of nowhere, we heard the ringing of a cell phone off in the distance. Then it went silent. The sound was clear and crisp, as it seemed to be no more than 50 meters from our spot. After about a minute had passed, we then heard distinct distant footsteps moving away. We stayed hidden for a few more hours listening for any additional sounds, until we eventually heard the sound of cars traveling in the distance. I concluded that it must have been after 8, but I made myself wait until at least 3 more cars passed before we got up. Then we gathered our belongings and made our way back to the car, but not before I told my girlfriend to hide back in the woods as I went ahead of her to survey the environment, just in case there was anything suspicious, or if there was someone waiting around nearby. I got in the car and started it up, and threw the passenger's door open for my girlfriend to jump in, and then I just floored it out of there. I didn't really care how dirty I was. I was just relieved and grateful that my girlfriend and I had made it out of that horrifying ordeal with our lives in one piece. As soon as we made our way into town, I drove straight to the police station, and we told the officer everything we'd seen and heard at that cemetery. They dispatched a couple units to the location, but were unable to find a body, or a piece of clothing, or any trace of blood. I had no idea what had really happened that night, or what was going on with the guy in the truck, or if the cell phone we heard had anything to do with it. I didn't know if the woman we heard screaming was okay, or if she died. Since that insane experience, all the horror movies we've watched together had been in the safety of our homes. The summer before I got married to my husband, I went back to my hometown to hang out with some of my old friends from high school. I stayed with my friend Rachel, who was still single, and had been my best friend throughout grade school. I hadn't seen her since high school graduation. We were hanging out in her basement reminiscing about the old days, when Rachel found one of her old yearbooks and flipped to a page where we had both written down our bucket list of things to do before we were married. Most of the things listed were vacation ideas and sexual endeavors that we had already achieved. However, the one that stuck out to us, which we still had yet to cross off, was to visit the Green Ladies Cemetery at night alone. We had gone through a bit of a spooky phase as teenagers and enjoyed exploring creepy abandoned houses while taking photos and recording EVPs. We decided to be spontaneous and daring, and thought no better time to get the last item on our list checked off than right then at that moment. So we drove out to the Green Ladies Cemetery close to 1 a.m. in the morning. The Green Ladies Cemetery wasn't its actual name, but that's what we called it when we were in school, since there were rumors about a woman wearing a green dress wandering through the cemetery at night. We drove straight to the graveyard in the dead of night, stone cold sober, and parked at the gate. We got out and then climbed over the fence and began exploring, wandering through the gravestones, suddenly feeling ridiculous as we had not brought any cameras or recording devices of any kind. It quickly dawned on me that the thrill of being able to say that we had explored a supposedly haunted cemetery at night would have carried much more weight when we were 18. At the moment as adults, it just didn't feel rewarding, although it was still kind of fun doing it together with my high school friend in a nostalgic kind of way, just to be getting into trouble with Rachel again. We made small talk wandering about through the rows of headstones while aiming our flashlights around and not feeling particularly scared, as we could still hear the faint sounds of traffic from the distant highway. Before long, we stopped to sit on the grass and spoke for a while when Rachel pointed past me into the darkness amidst the gravestones a few yards ahead. "What's that?" she asked, more excited than alarmed. I looked to where she was pointing. I noticed a very minute pinprick of orange light and shrugged. A slight feeling of disappointment started to sink in. "I think it's a cigarette." "I think it's a cigarette. I guess we're not alone after all," I said. "Ah, fuck," Rachel grumbled, and waved her hand in a sort of sarcastic grating in the direction of the small light. There was a few seconds of silence before a deep, raspy voice called out to us, clear as glass. "Fucking leave, or I'm going to tear your baby out." My blood ran ice cold, and I leapt to my feet, absolutely petrified. Rachel screamed back in the direction of the voice. "What the fuck did you just say? Don't fucking threaten us. Come closer, I'll kick your pansy ass." I suddenly grabbed Rachel by the arm and quickly dragged her in the direction of the car as she was still yelling profanities back at whoever had spoken. I didn't turn back around, so I don't know what this stranger was doing, but he never uttered another word. Rachel was pissed the whole ride that we were bullied into leaving, but I managed to calm her down after we hit a drive-thru and went back to her place to eat. We eventually had a good laugh over it and decided to cross the experience off our bucket list anyway. Rachel eventually passed out on her couch while we were watching a movie, but I remained wide awake. A cold sweat ran down my neck until dawn came. In retrospect, I feel like I did a good job of hiding my terror from Rachel, as I had not told her I was pregnant and was way too early to be showing. When I think about it, what that stranger said to me could not have been a coincidence, and it chilled me to my bones, as I don't remember seeing his silhouette in the darkness. Just a point of orange light. I finally fell asleep at 7 in the morning, with the echo of the man's threat repeating itself in an endless loop inside my head. A few nights later, I began my long drive back home across state to my fiancée and family, but stopped before I got to the highway. I couldn't resist swinging by the Green Ladies Cemetery one last time. I parked the car, but I didn't get out, as night was approaching. I just stared out across the graves into the distance for several minutes. It was only when darkness had completely fallen when I noticed a speck of glowing orange light from within the fence among the headstones. I turned on my headlights, but the light revealed no one. I immediately reversed out of the parking lot and got back onto the road and never looked back.